Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another Green Thumb Lecture Series. My name is John Schaefer, and I'm with the Harris County Public Library. Joining me today will be a member of the Harris County Master Gardeners Association for a very special presentation and discussion, which we are all very excited about. Let me go ahead and get this banner off here because the program has started. We are here online every third Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m., so make sure you set your calendars for that. Today's topic is success with spring vegetables, so it is a perfect timed topic. We were just talking about this backstage, as it were, that I'm going to be going to the nursery or going to maybe a plant sale this coming Saturday. Before I introduce our presenter, I just want to go over a couple of things real quick. First, we love questions, so please type those questions into the chat on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you are watching this. We will take a break in the middle of the presentation and also at the end of the presentation to answer those questions. And second, I want to let you know about our next show, March 19th. We will be talking about edible landscaping, so kind of a little sort of similar, but it will be with Benny Matusik, an old favorite. Everybody loves Benny. So we'll be talking about that on March 19th. So, but today we are talking about success with spring vegetables. So I'm very excited to introduce your presenter, Miss Valerie Depew. Valerie became an active member of the Master Gardener program in 2019, shortly after retiring from a 25-year career in the pharmaceutical industry. She appreciates the engagement and continues to learn learning that goes with Harris County Master Gardener. Midlife career change took her to the University of Texas Health Science Center, where she earned a master's in biomedical communications before entering the pharmaceutical field. She has been gardening for decades, learning from the ups and downs, and considers her father to have been the most influential garden mentor. I love that. Her personal garden is a blend of large livestock, which I still want to see pictures of one day, water troughs and vegetable herbs and pollinators and native flower beds, and a sprinkling of old Southern heirlooms. So Valerie, how are you today?
Oh, I'm very well, John. Thank you so much for that too kind introduction.
I love it. I love it. And I'm not kidding. I want to see a picture of some of the large livestock one day. So.
Well, there is a photo in the presentation of livestock troughs used as containers. So it's not my garden, it's the Genoa Friendship Garden, but I'll try to point that out to you when we get there.
All right. Well, that's good. I'm looking forward to that. Once again, a reminder, we're going to get going because I know we have a lot to cover today. But once again, a reminder that if you have a question, please type that into wherever you're watching this, and we will get to that. Also, we will have this recorded on YouTube, so you can come back and view it and check it again if you need to check on some information. So let's go ahead and get into it, Valerie. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. And it's always a wonderful opportunity to present this information to the public in this great partnership that we have with the Harris County Public Library System. So we're so happy to be here. As Master Gardeners, what we try to do is bring solid research-based information to the public in regards to gardening and horticulture. So we have quite a bit to cover, and we'll go ahead and get started. I did want to say hello to those of you that are watching on recording, because who knows when this will be, but we appreciate everybody that tunes in to watch. So thank you again. And this, as John mentioned, is the Green Thumb Gardening Series that we have throughout the year. The schedule should be posted in the chat box. And there are 2 presentations a month. The Harris County Public Library is, as John mentioned, the third Tuesday of the month. And there will be a really interesting presentation next month as well, and throughout the year. So we do have a plant sale coming up, and I definitely want to emphasize that this is coming up this Saturday. And our presentation here talks about growing spring vegetables. Well, we have some. Tomatoes and peppers in particular are going to be talked about in the presentation, and this sale will be this coming Saturday. As you can see, this is at the Al Bonson Park. It's more on the northwest side of town. And we'd love to see you out there and just enjoy talking to you and answering questions on site. So when we think about growing vegetables, we talk a lot about spring vegetable gardening, fall vegetable gardening. We're so fortunate here in Harris County that we can really grow throughout the year, and that's a wonderful advantage. But why do you want to do that? Why do you want to grow your own vegetables? There are so many good reasons. They taste better. You can control what's applied to the plants in your garden. It's great exercise. There's a lot of research on both the physical and mental benefits of gardening. And if you have kids, it's a wonderful way to be involved with them in the garden. Now, slide looks a little odd. Okay, there are many things that you have to consider when you are planting, and one of those is the location, the space, and then the planting zone. So let's just get right into that. Garden location is critical to success. Why is that? Well, vegetables need a certain amount of sunlight in order to not just grow leaves, but to grow the produce that you want to harvest, right? So leafy greens can take a little bit less sunlight, but in general, our spring vegetables need a good amount. So this is very important that you consider exactly where your garden is going to be placed. Also, the soil, we want good organic soil, and we're going to talk about each one of these points in more detail. Free of competition, what does that mean? Well, it's basically if you have a tall building, if you have to watch the sunlight in your garden, if you have a taller building, a roof line or something that impedes the sun half of the day, then that's not necessarily the best place to place your garden. So that's something to keep in mind, as well as availability of water. Good air circulation is critical in terms of preventing diseases and helping your plants grow better. And then visibility. Well, what does that mean? Not just that you can see it. It means that you can watch what's happening in your garden, and that's so important. So when it comes to water, we all know that our summers can be difficult at times, right? How do you keep your plants happy when we have such volatile water? It can pour, then it cannot rain for weeks and weeks. Drip irrigation is highly recommended. If it's at all possible for you to set up a drip irrigation system in your garden, it's best because it will apply water at the roots instead of showering the entire plant, which can lead to a higher risk of disease. If you can apply the water at the roots, it's so much more beneficial. Plants will take it up better and they'll get the water that they need. So you can see vegetable plants needing 1 to 2 inches of water a week. And it refers to the later summer watering especially. Well, that's a lot of water in terms of you having to go out and do that by hand all the time. So think about drip irrigation. It's really worth studying and seeing if you can apply it. And then raised beds tend to be more manageable in terms of retaining that water and controlling the drainage, and adding compost really helps a lot as well. So the thing about a raised bed is that you can use the raised bed to rise above poor soil conditions. Basically, you're building up. If you have clay soil, which, as we all know, can be difficult to work, although it has a lot of nutrition, oddly enough, it's very difficult to work. But if you can build up above your soil line and bring in good, or hopefully organic based material to supplement your soil, you can have a really rich mix that has the right amount of drainage and the right amount of moisture retention and the right amount of nutrient retention. So keep that in mind. And in general, it's also important, think about what we just said about siding the raised beds in terms of sunlight, in terms of visibility, in terms of air circulation. Make sure that those are in the proper place and at the proper height. It's not recommended to go much larger than 4 feet across. It's also not recommended to walk on your soil once you have a raised bed in place. So if you do have to cross your bed to do any work, it's a good idea to take a piece of lumber, a plank or something, so that you can walk across. The reason for that is that you can, over time, compact the soil, which is not what we want. We want some loose, friable soil that drains well and provides the nutrition. So raised beds are the way to go in Houston and many, many parts of the world for very good reasons. You want to start with a good soil mix. Good quality garden soil and compost for that organic material will get your plants off to a great start. Also, Oh, John, yes. So the picture on the bottom right, those are livestock watering troughs used as containers.
Great. Now, do you actually have any livestock though?
Well, I did. I had horses for most of my life. Now,
Okay, okay.
at Genoa Friendship Garden, I don't think so. That I don't believe there's any livestock wandering around. But yeah, they really do make good containers. You have to. It breaks your heart to drill the holes in the bottom, but it has to be done. But these are large containers, and one thing to keep in mind is the larger the container, the better in terms of retaining water and providing nutrition to your plants. So they have more of a growing zone for the roots. So in general, the larger the better. And that's why the stock troughs are popular. But there are all kinds of galvanized prefab containers now that you can put together. Point with veggies in containers is that you can grow almost everything in a container that you can grow in the ground. So you'll need additional water. You'll need additional fertilizer as well, because everything does leach out much faster. But there are many new, really fun, deliberately bred dwarf varieties for containers, and you'll see that more and more. When you go to seed websites now, you'll see vegetables for containers. I have some tomatoes that only get no more than 2 feet high. There are tomatoes that you can grow in a hanging basket, which is really a lot of fun. And now there are smaller pepper varieties and, well, pretty much anything you can think of. So there's an okra variety that we'll talk about a little bit that's perfect for a container. So if you live in an apartment, a townhome, a smaller space, please don't think that you can't have a vegetable garden, because you can. It's just a matter of choosing the right container and the right varieties to go in it. So one thing we can't skip past, it's so important, is remember that the good stuff, the brown stuff, is your soil foundation. And if you have that right, your chance of success is so much better. So organic material is critical to that. As I mentioned, we kind of think a foundation of 2/3 of good. You can use like a raised bed mix or a container mix, depending on what you're planting out. 2/3 soil and 1/3 compost is a really good way to start, because that's going to give you some good organic material and provide enough pore space for water and air. Let's not forget that those roots also need oxygen, and that's critical to their health. If you're growing in the ground, highly recommended that you go ahead and do a soil test, because we're going to talk a little bit here about fertilization, but your soil is not my soil, and it's going to be all individual. So it's easy to think I'll just apply a blanket fertilizer to my garden. It's much more accurate if you know exactly what nutrients are needed for your soil. So soil tests, the form should be in the chat box. And it's really an easy thing to do. You take samples from various places in your garden, bag it all up together, and send it off to the lab. They'll give you a detailed report and tell you exactly which nutrients are missing, which ones you need to supplement, so that it can save you a lot of money in terms of not applying fertilizer that you don't need. And it can be a much better foundation for your garden. And you've heard me already mention a couple of times organic material. Organic mulch is one of the best things you can do in a vegetable garden. So these first slides are talking about kind of the ingredients, and then we're going to talk about specific plants. But mulch is critical to success. It helps to retain that moisture as it gets hotter around here. We want to keep those plant roots cooler, and mulch will help to do that. Regulates the soil temperature, both actually when it gets too hot and when it gets too cold, right? Because it helps to retain warmth as well. Suppresses weeds. I won't say that it eliminates them. I would never say that, but it does help to suppress weeds. And there are many different kinds that you can use, some that are free. I'm a big fan of chopped up leaves. I have a beautiful oak tree in the backyard, and it provides all the shredded leaves that I can use. So pine needles probably are underused, and there's usually an abundance of those. Straw is excellent. I would caution you against hay. And the main reason for that is that most hay that is fed to horses and livestock is often treated with herbicides. Now, if you're talking about just general coastal prairie hay and you know where it came from, it's probably going to be just fine. But if you're talking about good quality coastal Bermuda, there's a high probability that that field was treated with herbicides, and you could have some real detrimental effects on your garden if you apply it. So would avoid hay unless you really know the source. So fertilizers, you always hear these three numbers. So what on earth, right? NPK. So nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Remember, they all have a different role in plant health. Now, plants also need many micronutrients, and we really don't have time to get into all of those. But in general, it helps to remember that nitrogen is the growing up, the leafy bushiness of whatever plants you're growing, whereas phosphorus is going to emphasize a stronger root system as well as the blooming and the fruit set, which is critical to a garden that you want to eat, right? And then potassium is overall robust, good health. So look at the numbers on the package. Remember that they each represent a percentage of how much is in that fertilizer. You can see on the bottom right, for example, if it's a 7, 15, 10, that's going to be 7% nitrogen, 15% phosphorus, and so 10% potassium. Pretty straightforward. But they each have a different role to play. And fertilizers come in different forms. Slow release fertilizer, we do recommend that you apply a slow release fertilizer as you're building your soil base for your vegetable garden, because it will release over time and really help to provide plants with adequate nutrition over a good period of time. So it's helpful. And these are usually in a granular form. A soluble fertilizer diluted with water, it's available in a form the plants can, the roots can take it up very quickly. Some of these also can be used as a foliar spray, which is another helpful form of feeding your plants and somewhat protective. And soluble fertilizer used in partnership with a good slow release fertilizer is really a great way to take care of your plants' nutritional needs. So if you're going to grow vegetables around here, it helps to know what grows where and exactly how our climate affects that. We have our hardiness zones. You can see the link to this map. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but the hardiness zones are critical because when you see those plant tags, you're going to see things that say grows in zone 9. Well, where is zone 9? It's changed a bit in terms of the 9A and 9B are gradually creeping a little bit more inward as our average temperature over the winter becomes slightly warmer. So again, all that information is on the website. Just be aware that there is a slight change, and our winters on average are a bit warmer than they used to be. Now, that doesn't mean we can't have a devastating hard freeze, as we all know, but this is just in regard to the average temperature. Just to show you how specific that can be, I live in the northwest side of town, and you can see that 77429 is basically a 9B area, and then 77433, just a little bit further out, is 9A. So we're next door neighbors, but you can see that there's just, and there are some pockets as well. For some reason, Tomball is a little bit of a pocket there for a zone. So it's really interesting. And I do, if you're going to have success with your vegetable garden, it helps to understand your growing zone. It also helps to understand when to plant. This is probably the most requested resource that we have as master gardeners, and justifiably so, because it can be confusing. If you're here from a different part of the country, if you've relocated from a zone 5 or something like that, I know that gardening here can be very puzzling. So I would highly recommend this resource. It tells you not just when to plant, it gives our average last frost dates, and it tells you the difference in planting from a seed or a transplant, when to start. And as you can see, things quiet down for the most part in the middle of the year, rather spring heavy and rather fall heavy. So that is the way we garden here. We can garden year round, but there are times when we can only grow, a few things. And we'll talk about those. So on that planting calendar, you'll see the differences as well in the first and last freeze dates for different parts of the county. One of the readings comes from Bush Intercontinental Airport, the other comes from Hobby, and there is a difference between the two. So also, it helps to know which varieties to grow. We do have a list of those, which will be in the chat box for you. And these are varieties that I won't never say you can only grow these. I would never say that. But what I can say is that these are varieties that have been tested and trialed by Harris County Master Gardeners and the Extension Service in many areas. And we know that they do well in Harris County. But it's also always fun to try something new. And so I think that's what we do as gardeners. But there is a pretty large list of them for almost every vegetable, I think, that's also on the planting schedule. And that's what that looks like. It's a 2-pager. And I mentioned that the planting schedule talks about starting seeds as well as using transplants. So if you are interested in starting seeds, keep in mind, please read all the directions on the package. Some seeds are best started inside. For example, we'll talk about tomatoes. Most tomatoes have already been started. Usually the prime time for starting them from seed is the first part of January, and people start them indoors with grow lights. So there are many that need to be planted directly outside. Cucumbers do well outside. Beets do well direct sown. So there are many others. Just take a look and make sure that you're using the appropriate type of plant for the right time. And if you are buying transplants from the nursery, if it's loose in the pot, there's nothing wrong with taking the plant out of the 4-inch pot and taking a look at the roots. That's fine. But you want good, strong, vibrant, healthy-looking plants with healthy-looking roots. You don't want dried up, yellow, shriveled roots. You want really robust, good, healthy white roots. And something that's been sitting there too long might already be impaired in terms of its growth. So you really want something that looks like it's in a good, strong growth trajectory, and that it's going to take off as soon as it goes into your garden. Also, be sure and read all of the information on the plant tag, because that can tell you in terms of spacing, which we talked about earlier. Spacing is important, height, etc. Now, this is one thing I admit I need to be better at. I do keep the plant tags. I'm not so good at keeping a written journal, and I do need to improve on that. But the reason is, well, what if you planted a great variety of tomato 2 years ago and you have no idea what it was? That sounds like something we can all relate to, right? So I've done that, and I intend to do better. But it is important. Keep notes in whatever form works for you. Digital is fine, but it really is very, very helpful. And I think we'll stop right here and just see if there are some questions that might pop up.
Yes, there are some questions. We have some great questions. By the way, I love the idea of a journal. That is really that's a good idea. Okay, quick question, or not a quick one. So Lisa Bedford wanted to know. She mentioned we were talking about the cattle troughs. Do they heat up in the summer? Is that obviously they're going to heat up, but enough to where they kind of cook the plants? Is that an issue?
Yeah, people ask me that all the time. I cannot say that's ever been a problem. I have measured the soil temperature. It is a little bit higher at the actual, at the rim of the trough, but I've just never had an issue with it. But I have heard other people say that anecdotally they thought they got too hot. I just haven't seen that with mine, because by the time they're getting too hot, most of the things that you're growing love the heat, like okra, eggplant, and things like that. So it hasn't been an issue for me. But I think that, maybe there's the potential that it could be.
So just kind of experiment, obviously, and it's obviously not going to be a factor that's going to keep you from trying it. So, talking about mulch, Edgar had this question, as I was writing this down too. Grass clippings like Bermuda, San Augustine, grass clippings as mulch. It seems like it might be a bad idea, but what do you think? What's the
I think number one, you really have to know the source. Again, if there's been any herbicide at all or anything that you don't want in your vegetables, then of course you want to rule out that as a source of mulch. I mean, I admit that I've used some San Augustine as mulch, but in combination with other things. So not solely as a mulch. I think you could potentially have some nitrogen issues with that. It's going to be maybe a little bit hot. So yeah, it wouldn't be my first call, that's for sure.
I was thinking because, I don't know that I've ever had our yard has ever not had something in it that's not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Crabgrass or whatever the case may be. And I would be afraid that would then turn over and become, part of the flower bed as well, or the vegetable garden as well. So
Yeah, but you can compost those grass clippings if you know the source.
there you
And
go.
then I think once they're given a little more time to break down, I wouldn't have any qualms. But
Perfect.
fresh off the lawn, I'm not sure that would be the right way to go.
Especially after a rain when it's all wet and everything. Yeah, perfect. I like that. Make it mulch first. I use some composting first, and then before you use it mulch. That's obviously it would be mulch, then it'd be compost. But okay, and a real specific question here from Joanne. Let me make sure I get this correct. What are the remaining ingredients in a bag of fertilizer after you subtract the percentage of NP and K?
That is a question I don't know the answer to. I think that is a great question. And I truly don't know. I wouldn't want to say, but I do know that anytime you use fertilizer, you do apply it according to the package instructions. Do exactly what they say and no more, and preferably no less, because that will increase your chances of success. But I mean, I would assume there is a lot of inert ingredients, just like in the pharmaceutical industry, you have active ingredients and inert ingredients. So that would be my assumption, but I really wouldn't want to say if I don't know for sure.
Well, this is a great time to mention once again that you can always check out the Master Gardener's website and put your questions in there and ask them. That's where it'll find it. It'll find somebody who does know, and you will get an answer for that. So definitely go ahead and do that. And we'll let you get back. Tell you, we're going to have more questions as they come, but I want to get back into it. This is awesome. Thank you, Valerie. So I'll put this back up here, and I'll let you get back into your presentation.
Fantastic. And I would also say to the gardening team on the back end, if you have a better answer for that question, please put it in the chat box, because that's what we're all about, right? Is finding the information. So, of course, to no surprise, we're going to jump into one of the most popular families for growing spring vegetables, and that's the nightshade family. That includes tomatoes, peppers, eggplants. We're not talking about potatoes today or tomatillos, but these are the ones that everyone wants to grow, in particular tomatoes and peppers around here. So they will not go into the ground until after that last frost, which is potentially already past us. But again, your weather professionals best know these things. And then you want to make sure that they're going to provide that 6 hours of sun, or receive that 6 hours of sun that they need to be big and healthy and strong. Also, remember that list of varieties that we talked about. Well, plant resistant varieties, if you possibly can, look on the tag and look for these types of initials, VF and T. These are bred to be resistant to some of the most common diseases that plague tomatoes. So look for those and try to buy resistant varieties, because it will help you in the long run and keep your garden healthier overall. Also, same thing applies that we talked about with the transplants. You want large plants, vigorous plants, and then you want to be prepared to fertilize them with slow release as you plant them, and use some of that foliar spray that I mentioned earlier for micronutrients. And also, when they start to set fruit, then you want to give them a bit more nitrogen to give them a supplemental boost. Also protect from harsh weather. It can be real windy this time of year. And so if you're about ready to put those tomatoes out, you might want to think about some kind of a row cover or some type of screen in case we have some of those really windy days, because they can just literally get beat up, stems break, leaves shred, and that sort of thing, because they're very tender when you first put them out. Let's see. Okay, so this is a soil temperature website, and tomatoes love warmer temperatures. They need that soil temperature to be 55 or 60 degrees. So I don't know that this link was sent to the resource team, but it is greencastonline.com, and they have a soil temperature tool that you can use. You can also use a soil probe as well, just to check, because what happens if you put them out too early, they won't take off. I don't know if any of you have had tomatoes that you just watched. Literally, they just seem to sit there because the temperature is just not quite optimum for them to start to grow, and they really need that. Then they can become stunted and more vulnerable. So that's why we want to wait till those nighttime temperatures really warm up, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, this is a recommended way to plant your tomatoes, which looks goofy, I will admit. What is going on here? We always talked about planting tomatoes very, very deep. That's still a good method to use. There's been a lot of research done on this sideways planting. The reason for that is if you do plant the plant at an angle, all along the stem there are these adventitious root nodules, and roots can spring up from them and basically make the plant very stable in the ground and take in more nutrition. So it really helps to provide you with a very strong, healthy tomato plant. It looks odd, but there is a process called phototropism. So what happens is if you plant that tomato plant sideways like that, the phototropic properties in the plant will start to pull it up towards the sun. It reacts to that sunlight. It needs that sunlight for photosynthesis. So over time, it will straighten up, it will not look funny, and it will be very strong. So it's one way to do it, or very, very deeply. Also, make sure that you have enough room between your tomato plants. You can see at the top, there's a lot of spacing. Again, all these things that we mentioned earlier, right? Sunlight, air circulation, there's water you can see. There's a lot of space here. Now look at the two on the bottom. What happens is on the left-hand side, this was a photo of a master gardener of ours that planted these plants and used these as an example in this presentation. And I think it's very applicable because they look like they have plenty of room when they're young. But make sure that you read all the package instruction, all the label instructions about how tall that plant's going to be and how much it's going to spread out, because they're there for a reason. And what happens is, when they're newly planted, they look great. Then they can sprawl and spread and kind of wrap into each other. And that's not ideal. So one way to do it. Also, I should mention, well, no, we'll get to that in a minute about staking and that sort of thing, but make sure that you leave room between your tomato plants for your staking or your cage or whatever you're going to use for support. And we'll talk a little bit about indeterminate versus determinate. And you heard me mention a while ago that in containers, you can grow virtually anything. Now, determinate is a plant that grows to a certain height. It's usually 3 to 4 feet. These tomatoes are bred this way, and everything on the plant will mature at once. So these are ideal for containers for that very reason, because they just don't get too large. Indeterminate are usually vining type tomatoes, and those are often our old heirloom tomatoes, some of the paste tomatoes and that sort of thing. They grow and grow throughout the growing season. They can get crazy tall, so they can be pruned, but they bear fruit throughout the growing season. And so it's all dependent on the variety of tomato that you want, the space that you have, and those types of decisions. But just keep in mind, that's what when the label says indeterminate, which it's usually represented by just an I or a D, then you'll know that that's what that means. So for Harris County, we have some really good tried and tested varieties. Brandywine, Roma, and Viva Italia are paste tomatoes. Champion is a good slicer. And then we have some great cherry tomatoes. Sun Gold and Sweet are fabulous. And indeterminate, we have and determinate, we have on the other side. We have an all-time all-star, which is Celebrity, great slicing, eating tomato. And then others that are recommended are Better Bush and Patio and Bush Early Girl, Celebrity, and Charger. I've grown all of those, and they've all done really, really well. So I probably would say my favorite is still Celebrity, just because of the yield. But there's one at the bottom left that you can see called Juliet. And Juliet is a delicious tomato. I've heard it referred to as semi-determinate, as determinate, as a cherry tomato, as a grape tomato. People call it all kinds of things. And I call it great. I mean, it's just delicious. It's a heavy yield, easy to grow. It may require some pruning because it's, like I said, it's not quite determinate, more semi-determinate, but a very, very popular variety in our area. So when it comes to staking versus caging, just make sure that you have the ability to sink that support into the ground so that the support will be stable. And then consequently, when you tie in your tomatoes, then they're in good shape that way. We don't want them breaking. Staking is great for your heirlooms, for your indeterminate tomatoes. Caging also. There's another method called cordon where you can take that indeterminate vining type tomato and reduce it to basically one stem that bears all the fruit, and you just tie the single stem in at the top. And that's also a good way because sunlight is provided all along the stem, plus good air circulation. The most important thing is, especially if you're growing indeterminates, that you give them support, and you have to gauge that support according to the space you have available. So we talked a little bit about that nighttime temperature. This is just a good illustration of that. We're all eager to get our tomatoes in the ground. We just have to make sure that our expectations are realistic, that those nighttime temperatures will be the temps that encourage fruiting and fruit set. Because if it's too cold, they won't flower and they certainly won't fruit. If it's too hot, then the flowers will start to drop. So there's a sweet spot, which is why we really have a great tomato season starting in March and harvesting more like a May. But that's because of the nighttime temperatures. So it gets very confusing. People will plant them and say, why aren't my tomatoes giving me any more fruit? Well, it's just because the nighttime temperatures either aren't there yet or they have changed and become too warm. Now, there's an exception to that because there's many cherry tomatoes that will keep on fruiting even when it gets a bit warmer than what's normally recommended. But those, that's fine. You know, if they go ahead and do that, we just benefit from it, right? So in general, nighttime is very, very important. And I did mention some of the indeterminates can get a little bit unwieldy. So how on earth do you handle that? Well, you do have to prune them. Unless you have tons of room and you just don't care and you want them to grow on forever, which is also fine. You can see on this illustration that there's a sucker on the left-hand side as well as the growing tip. You can take both of those out. Always take out the suckers on the indeterminate tomatoes because they just will get really unwieldy otherwise. But you can take out the growing tip just to keep the size in check, and it won't impact your plants at all. Another thing that I think as a master gardener, this is one of the things that I learned, and I just thought, why on earth? I'm always losing my tomatoes to birds because they just love those beautiful red ones, right? And the mockingbirds and everybody, and they get thirsty when it's hot. So what could I do for that? Well, the big revelation to me was the understanding that I can harvest them much earlier and that they're going to be just fine. They will continue to ripen on the outside. So if you harvest your tomatoes somewhere between that breaker and turning stage, then they're essentially already ripe inside or matured inside. They just have a little bit more finishing to do. They will finish identical to the ones that are left outside on the vine. And this, like I said, it was a revelation to me. And I was able to beat the birds in many situations. Also, there are little organza bags that you can buy from the like Party Store and places like that. And if you want to protect your individual tomatoes, you can take those organza bags and tie them over the tomatoes, whether it's in a cluster or an individual slice or tomato, and just tie them off. And that will really help in terms of keeping pests away. Speaking of pests, we do, as master gardeners, talk about something called integrated pest management, because organically we like to use the least harmful intervention first. Those are usually barrier or cultural methods. When I mentioned the organza bags, that's a barrier method. Cultural is when you basically are encouraging situations that allow for the plants to battle the situation themselves. And then we get to physical and mechanical, which is sweeping things off into soapy water, eliminating things like that. So, for example, a tomato hornworm, which unfortunately didn't have a copyright picture of a tomato hornworm, copyright-free picture, I should say. That is a big, fat green worm, and he needs to be eliminated very quickly if you ever see one. Actually, usually what happens is we see the plant that's already decimated by the hornworm, which is why we said your garden needs to be visible. Checking every single day for any signs of damage will really help you to circumvent something that can be disastrous. A hornworm can clean a tomato in a day or two easily. So hand picking them is an easy way just to get rid of them. They make great bird food, but I usually put them in a place where the birds can take care of them. And then up from that, insecticidal soap. So that is the integrated pest management pyramid in reverse, using the mildest intervention first, hand picking, then insecticidal soap, and then BT, and on from there. Leaf-footed bugs at the bottom right grow up to be, we used to always call them, just referred to generally as stink bugs. So that's what I'm talking about. It's that big brown bug that has the flat paddle-like leaves on the back end. But when they're young, this is what they look like. They travel in packs. And this in the middle is an egg cluster. That's where these all hatched from. And so these are the newly hatched stink bugs. Shortly before I put them all into a glass of soapy water and took care of them. But this is one thing that will really ruin the taste of your tomatoes over time. If you know that the stink bugs are attacking them, you'll see a pierced, kind of a yellow spot on your tomatoes. And one or two of those is not a big deal, but if they really attack a tomato, it makes them tough and a little bit unpleasant. So again, this is the reverse integrated pest management method on the right, with first hand picking and then neem oil and on from there. But honestly, if you get them early, you can usually hand pick and take care of something like a leaf-footed bug easy by just tossing it into water. And I would also mention on this page, you do have a couple of insecticides that are listed by their mostly generic name. But anytime you use something like that, please make sure you apply it according to the package directions. It's very, very important to do that for many reasons. Number one, they're tested that way, and the companies know exactly how much you should use. You don't need to use more thinking that more is going to be better. So anytime you apply, whether it's an herbicide, a fertilizer, or a pesticide, always apply it strictly according to the package label. Here are some other problems that you can have. Blossom end rot. You may have already seen this at times. And the thing is that it's usually caused by a volatile moisture level. So there's like low moisture, then an abundance of moisture. So I should say not volatile, but more erratic moisture level. It goes up and down. Because of that, the plant's not able to take up calcium from the soil. And you can use some lime or some calcium when you plant your tomatoes in an attempt to try to circumvent that, but it's got to be a kind that can be absorbed by the plant. You can apply some liquid calcium nitrate as a spray and a drench, I believe, if you already have the problem. But most of the time, you can take care of blossom end rot by simply making sure that your plants have a consistent moisture level. That's the big key. So consistently moist, not drying out, then drenching, and drying out, then drenching, because that really is detrimental. I have on the bottom there a word about eggshells. It's because so many people say just grind up eggshells and put that in the hole. And the unfortunate truth is that eggshells, it doesn't matter. You can blitz them into oblivion and they're into a fine powder, but they simply can't be absorbed by the plant roots because the eggshells are a calcium carbonate and they just don't break down into a form that can be absorbed by the plant roots. So sometimes anecdotally, people may do that and see an improvement, but it very likely was not. The eggshells really does have to be in a form that they can take up. So Early blight also may be something that you see. If you do start to see blight, take those leaves off the plant immediately, and then is kind of a sequence of remedies that you can apply as well. But the most important thing about early blight is try to catch it as soon as you see it and take those leaves away and make sure there's more air circulation. And then you have methods that you can apply. Let's see. Okay. And then for peppers, one of the most popular plants of all. Most transplants will end up getting, range from 2 to 4 feet tall in your garden. They're going to need adequate room, but peppers love the heat. And that's one of the great things about growing them around here. If you buy good, strong, healthy transplants that are about 6 to 8 inches tall, and go ahead and get them out in the garden as soon as it warms up, you'll have a great harvest. So make sure that they're fed with a balanced fertilizer. You can apply a couple of tablespoons around each plant, but again, make sure it's a balanced fertilizer. And they mature quickly, and you can harvest them when they're beautiful and shiny and firm, and they taste delicious. And we have some great varieties for Harris County, obviously jalapenos. If you're one of the ones that likes the hot peppers, also serrano peppers, we have good growing peppers such as Big Bertha and Summer Sweet that are great varieties. And many people love this scale because they like to challenge themselves on this scale. I'm way at the bottom. I'm more a poblano type. But the Scoville units just is a gradation of the heat units in a pepper. And just, keep in mind that some of these can be extremely hot to the point that they're dangerous. So know your limits and grow what you enjoy eating is what I would say. But peppers do very well here. Eggplant, one of the ones that we love to grow because you can get so much fruit from it. Easy to grow, loves the heat. You can harvest it quickly. The one thing I would say about eggplant is harvest it when the skin is shiny and more tender. So if you allow it to start to be really large and the skin looks dull, then you've kind of gone past the point where it's going to be very delicious because the seeds will be dried out and larger and tough and not so fun. So these are some good varieties for Harris County. Purple Rain is one that's very prolific. Early Long, Black Beauty, these are all good varieties, and they're on that variety sheet. And legumes, I have to say that I love green beans. My probably number one spring vegetable, even over tomatoes. I just love green beans. And you plant them direct sow. March is an optimum time, usually middle of March. You can also get a second harvest in November. There are varieties that mature very, very quickly, 55 to 60 days. Others take a little bit longer to be ready to eat. And you harvest them when they're very young and tender, and you pick them frequently, sometimes every day, depending on how many you have. Fertilizer needs are generally for 10, 20, and 10, a little bit higher on the phosphorus there. These are some great varieties, and I do apologize. I'm not sure what's happened to the alignment on some of these slides, but hopefully they're easy to read. Of all of these, the pole beans, there are some good solid heirlooms. Northeaster, Rattlesnake, those do extremely well as Blue Lake pole. And on the right-hand side, I would just point out these are all tested here. And if you just want a solid green bean that will grow well in Harris County and have a great yield, Contender is the way to go. It's just a wonderful, wonderful variety. Lima beans and butter beans, I have them on the same slide, not necessarily because they're the same, although they are very, very similar. They're kind of like kissing cousins. But you eat them a little bit differently, or I should say you cook them a little bit differently, but they are grown the same. So when you look for these old varieties, they will do well here. Ford Hook is a great heirloom. Florida Butter is another one. So grow basically the same as your green beans and enjoy. And Southern peas, we love our Southern peas. Purple hulls are a stalwart around here. The great thing about Southern peas is that they can take this heat that we have. So you can grow them, through the middle of the summer. And as long as you keep them well fed and keep your soil moist, they should continue to bear, which is a wonderful thing. Black-eyed peas, zipper creams are all delicious. And I'm sure many of you have fond memories of shelling them when you were a kid. And common pests for basically beans and peas, there aren't that many. Pea aphid you may see, and the bean leaf roller is a hallmark of it. Is actually the leaves do exactly what it said. They're rolled up because the long-tailed skipper butterfly will lay eggs on the bean and then roll it up. Makes a little kind of a nest for the larvae that hatch, and then the little caterpillars will eat the leaves. I personally don't do a lot when I see that on my green beans because number one, it usually happens toward the end of the season. And number two, I like to feed the butterflies. So I don't really worry about that. There are some viruses that can plague. If you do happen to see any of your bean plants that have kind of a mottled appearance on the leaves, you probably have something called mosaic virus. You can see this is variegated dark green, light green, or I should say alternating. So that's a sign of mosaic virus. But if you do a little bit more research, if you see that, there is not really a cure for it. So the plants have to come out. And I know we are running out of time, so I'm going to hurry through as much as I can here. Squash is one of the things we do need to talk about. We all love summer squash. It's delicious. It grows when it gets to grow, it grows very well, can produce quite a bit. Zucchini, yellow squash, scallops, so many delicious kinds of squash. They need a lot of room. They need a lot of space because they will ramble and spread out, and they can be grown vertically as long as you have the right supports as well. But applying a balanced fertilizer and getting them off to a good start is critical. And also for plants in this family, the cucurbits, they will have both male and female flowers, which can be a little bit confusing because you'll see all these flowers. The male is at the top right. And you'll wonder, why on earth isn't my plant bearing any or having any yield here? And the female flower is at the bottom right. These usually come after the male flowers have already started to appear. And you'll see there's just a little bit like a miniature fruit at the base of the female flower. Obviously, they have to be pollinated in order to bear fruit. And you may at times think about resorting to hand pollination if you see a lot of your blooms withering and dropping, which is easily done with a Q-tip or a paintbrush or something of that nature. And you just literally take the pollen from the male plant and apply it to the female flower when the flower is open. And this is why we get a little bit sad when we talk about squash, because we all love it and it does so well when it has the opportunity. But there is a pest called the vine borer that really decimates squash, to say the least. If you have a great healthy looking plant, you go out one day and it's just wilted and there's no apparent reason for that. Look closely, you may see some shavings. You may see the stem desiccated and dried out. And that's usually a sign of the squash vine borer. It's very prolific in our area. So there are things that you can try to do to prevent it. You can open up the stem, take the larva of the actual fly out, and inject BT. And I guess I hesitate over that because you'll have mixed results with it. It may work now and then, but in general, it's a difficult thing. There are methods to try to wrap the stem or bury it with more soil, or even if you see preliminary damage, heaping more soil over the stem may allow other parts of it to grow, and you may still get some yield off of it that way. Wrapping the stem with all kinds of things, foil and netting, and again, anything is worth a try, but it's very, very difficult. Using row cover is probably one of the best ways to prevent the squash vine borer. But if you do cover your plants completely, then you will have to hand pollinate. So keep that in mind. You can plant ahead of the life cycle. The borers usually show up about end of April, May. By May, they're really rolling along. So if you plant early with your squash and then maybe try another crop in the fall, that's one way to hopefully get a good yield. The other way is to plant a resistant variety. And right now, we only know of one that is resistant, and that's called the Tatume squash. It's at the bottom right. So it's a round squash, which is very delicious. But otherwise, our tried and true varieties, the yellow, crookneck, and things like that, and all the zucchinis, they're really susceptible to the squash vine borer. And that's just something that we're going to have to deal with for a while. But there's a lot of research going into ways to deal with this little critter. And hopefully there will be something soon that will help us out. Cucumbers, I would want to say that you can direct sow cucumbers and they will be strong and healthy and should grow well into June. But they will eventually succumb to either the heat or possibly downy mildew, which is a common culprit. However, there are mildew resistant varieties that are becoming more and more available. But otherwise, if you direct sow your cucumbers, give them a balanced fertilizer, a good strong trellis to grow on, they will provide you with lots of great slicers or pickling cucumbers. They love our heat, and it's just one of the easiest to grow. These are some good varieties, pickling varieties. Definitely, I grow a lot of National Pickling just because it's so reliable, and that really helps a lot. And then on the right side, Space Master and Sweet Success, those are some good ones. But again, refer to that variety list for Harris County. And for melons, we've talked a lot about growing in space that you may have. Well, melons take a lot of space. They love to ramble. And just think of the watermelon fields. I mean, the vines go everywhere. So in our more suburban areas or in our patios, patio homes and townhouses, what do? You can grow vertically. And that's probably the easiest way to grow melon crops. They need a support. If you start to have a melon on the vine, which would be the same process as what we just talked about with the squash and the cucumber, you're going to have male flowers, then you'll have the female fruiting flowers, and you can kind of spot one. So once it starts to mature, you can support it and allow it to grow and go ahead and harvest it that way. That looks like a support with older pantyhose, which is okay. That works too. So you can grow great cantaloupe here, watermelon, honeydew. There's the watermelon sugar baby is a lot of fun for kids to grow because it's like an individual watermelon and it's delicious. It's planting season is April through the heat of the summer, mid-June. If you go ahead and plant, you can harvest. And then again, they will eventually just kind of peter out with the extreme heat. Keep them steadily moist and well fertilized. Here are some other varieties. The Tam varieties are always solid. Ambrosia cantaloupe on the upper right, I've grown that many times, and it straight off the vine is just delicious. So it's one of my favorites. Did mention powdery mildew earlier. It's caused by stress, and so over time, it seems like most of my cucumbers do succumb to powdery mildew. High humidity, these extreme temperatures, inconsistent water, over time that happens. Also the potential for squash bugs, but I have to say they're just, the squash vine borer is such an extreme pest that we don't worry that much about squash bugs. And the last one that we're going to talk about is okra. Looks like we have a couple minutes here on, we'll be at an hour, but we can't leave without talking about okra, because it is delicious. It's easy to grow. It loves the heat. You can direct sow okra in the garden, or you can start it from seed inside, but prefer to sow it outside myself. And harvesting, depending on the variety, can be 50 or 60 days. The thing is, once it starts, it won't stop for a while. So you need to harvest your okra every single day. And we talk about harvesting it. It says on this slide, 3 to 4 inches long. It's not so much an artifact of the actual size of the okra as it is of how young it is. So it needs to be baby okra to be good and tender. So even though it may be 3 inches long, if it's been 3 inches long for a while, because that can happen, then it could very well be tough and not so enjoyable. So watch your okra pods when they're new and they get to the size that you want, but they're young. Grab them then, and that may be harvesting every single day. But it's so worth it. There are some varieties that I eat the pod. I do literally eat it raw because to me it's got this really great nutty flavor and it's a good snack as you're walking around the garden. And I just think okra is delicious, but I did not think that when I was a very small child. So tastes change. Also, you can dry one out and save the seed for next year. And here are some varieties. Clemson Spineless is a classic. Cajun Delight's a good one. I have been growing a lot of Baby Bubba because it's a container variety and I can fit quite a few in one trough. So the yield on it is very, very good. But these, again, refer to your varieties list for that. And I think we're here at the summary. Summary is select a sunny location, which we talked about. I did not mention when we were on tomatoes, but sunny location is critical. Sometimes it can be too sunny. So you may be in a position where some of your plants are suffering from the heat. In that case, if you can use some shade cloth on them to give them a little relief, that can often really extend your growing season quite a bit. Prepare your soil with good organic material and be prepared to add your compost and your mulch. Choose the right varieties, plant them at the right time. Again, mulch, control the weeds, and that's always a battle for all of us. But honestly, doing a little bit every single day is a big, big help. And keep your plants as consistently watered as possible. You've heard, probably I've said that, I don't know, a dozen times, but consistent, even watering is so much better. And then harvest and enjoy. And I think that is all that we have for today. Accept questions.
I was sorry. I was just looking at the questions. There's a lot of them. We've had a lot of stuff come in. Everybody is really engaged in the chat, and there's a lot of really good links and tips and answers in the chat. So I recommend everybody check that out. Also, there is a survey in there that we do ask that you take a look at, and when we're done, please go ahead and fill out that survey. We would really appreciate that. Okay, well, let's get into some of these questions. Edgar, we're talking about tomatoes. Edgar was wanting to know if are eggshells good for bloom rot on tomatoes?
Edgar, they're really not. And the problem with that, and my dad, that's one thing, if he were still with us today, we would have this conversation because he did use eggshells. And it seems like it would make sense, right? And even if you break them up and pound them and make them a powder, they're still a different form of calcium. Their eggshells are calcium carbonate, and the roots of the plant just cannot take up that kind of calcium. So they need a calcium nitrate. And so no, generally they're not recommended because they just really won't have any benefit. You may see benefit from something else that may have happened at the same time, but it likely wasn't the eggshells.
Got it. Good. And keeping with tomatoes, Callie, I believe is how you say it. We want to know about Burpee Big Boy tomatoes, which best name for a tomato ever. But your thoughts on Burpee Big Boys?
Truly, I'm not that familiar with that variety. There may be one of the other master gardeners that has some information on that in the chat line, but it sounds like it would be promising, and I would sure give it a try.
Okay, well, maybe we'll have to come back next year and include that in the in our presentation. Mary Beth was interested in. We had an answer to this, but I'm interested in the chat. But I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Does the chlorine in our city water have a negative impact on vegetable gardens?
That's a pretty interesting issue. And I don't know how much. I mean, there's been research done on that. The best water that you can give your plants by far is rainwater because of the pH neutrality of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know the specific research, and someone else in the chat line may have some information on that. But you know what I would encourage with this question is send it in to the Ask a Master Gardener online. And that way the person answering the question would have time to do some additional research and respond to that we always want to give an accurate answer. And, right. My gut feeling is that, I didn't possibly, I don't know, but it's kind of the water we're all having to use, right?
It's true. We did have one answer from a master gardener in the thing, and I'll just read that real quick. This comes from Chev T. Chlorine water affects the soil organisms. Suggest holding water for 24 hours for the chlorine to evaporate before watering. Rainwater harvesting is highly recommended, obviously concurring with you. So for vegetable gardens. So that's an idea, is like if you sit that water outside, or if you maybe have a bucket you can put the water in the sun, let it kind of let the chlorine and the chemicals leave.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally concur. What I do, I have sprayers in my greenhouse, and whenever I add water to the sprayer, I always leave it open for 24 hours to 48 hours and let the chlorine dissipate. And I'll do that with buckets. I'll fill up buckets to let it dissipate. The exact research on it, I don't have at hand, but if you can allow it to go ahead and just evaporate into the air, then that's at least it's gone that way.
Absolutely. And a question about soil. Now I know most people in Harris County and or in the surrounding counties have that black clay, regular soil that comes up. Is there any vegetables that are going to grow in that if you just want to go super old school and throw something in there? If you have a spot, is there anything that's going to make it in that?
Sure. Well, okra, definitely. So here's the thing about that. It's horrible to work with. It gets as hard as concrete when it's dry, and then it's just goopy when I grew up with it, so I know it well. It's goopy when it's wet, but it also has a lot of nutrient value. And that doesn't seem like it would make sense, but it does. And I grew up down in the more Pearland, Friendswood area. My dad's garden was mostly based on gumbo, and everything grew. So over time, if you want to make it better and better, it's a good base. But if you can add lots and lots of good organic material, then you may not always have a soil it's easy to work with,
right,
but you will have a soil that things can grow. But yes, for sure, okra.
For those who love a challenge, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we're getting close to the end. I just definitely want to remind everybody that there's a survey that if you could fill that out in the chat, we would really appreciate that. Also, I definitely want to thank, we had a all-star group of people helping us behind the scenes here. Karen, Lisa, Joanne, Chev, Stephanie, Celeste, and Adrian. A lot of master gardeners in there, and some Harris County employees as well, kind of helping this all run smoothly, and we certainly do appreciate their help. Let me see if there's anything else I can get into here real quick. I want to say, Chev putting so many great comments in the chat line. I think I'm going to go back and spend more time reading all that. So, you have a sale coming up this Saturday. I know you mentioned to me earlier that I think I will be at. Tell us one more time about the sale on Saturday.
Yeah, tomatoes, herbs, peppers, and perennials, and it's at Alabonson Park. This coming Saturday from 9 to noon. See, I don't have the address memorized. Other than that, it is on North Houston Roslyn Road.
We'll see if we can get it posted up in the chat. So that's good to know. And you'll have mostly focused on tomatoes though, but anything other things there as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, tomatoes and lots of peppers too.
Lots of peppers and tomatoes.
And herbs. And perennials.
Awesome. And I want to remind you also, staying with the edible theme, our next show is going to be on the third Tuesday of next month, which will be on March 19th. And we'll be talking about edible landscaping with Benny. So edible landscaping. Valerie, thank you so much for taking the time and presenting this to us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's a wonderful opportunity to bring that information to anybody that's interested in spring gardening.
And there are many. I can tell you, we've had a lot of, I'm looking at the numbers right now. We've had a lot of viewers watching the live presentation. Of course, all of our presentations for the Green Thumb Gardening Series live online at our YouTube, and you can find them on Facebook as well. So with that, I will say we will see you next month, everybody. Once again, the third Tuesday of the month, and we will be here March 19th for edible landscaping. Valerie, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.